Is this necessary?
That was my skull. I'm so wasted.
Is this proper?
What is it that gets inside your heads?
Is this educational? No, but it sure is fun.
Hey, bud, let's party.
See Fast Times at Ridgemont High, where only the rules get busted. Rated R.
Starts Friday, August 20th at theaters in your area. Check newspapers for showtime.
Welcome to Living in the Past, where three middle-aged dudes relive their past by enjoying the pop culture of their youth. Devin, are you ready to smoke a joint, be tardy to history class, work in the mall, go to the point, and throw hot coffee in the face of someone committing armed robbery?
Hey, Jeremy.
Yeah.
What was that? My skull! Oh, give me some Spicoli. Let's do this. Listen. I'm sorry, listener. I'm so excited about this. I have said on I think maybe our most recent episode, in regards to celluloid history, there was Metropolis, there was Citizen Kane, and there was Die Hard. Let me just continue that by the next level. There is Metropolis. There, in fact, is Citizen Kane. There is Die Hard, and then, unquestionably, a film without blemish, Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Jeremy, I had this on videotape and played it out. I could not be more excited.
It's a classic film, and this is the 40th anniversary of Fast Times.
That's great.
So
that's great.
One of the things we're going to be doing this year is we are going to be looking at the films of 1982. Our patrons said, this is what we want, and so we're going to give it to our patrons.
Yeah.
But not only that, we're going to look at some 30 anniversary films. We're going to be looking at the year of 1992 as well this year. So those are some of the things that we got going on, but this was the first one we picked from 82, and that's Fast Times.
Glorious.
We have Carl, the intern, here to help us make sense of this film. And so, Carl, as we start the show, what interesting facts from your profound research have you uncovered to help us dive deeper into this movie?
I mean, there are really a lot of interesting facts. I mean, there's all these kind of cameos, like a Bruce Springsteen cousin and Nicolas Cage kind of being there, and different people like minor roles in their first on-screen appearances. There's even Amy Heckerling was not actually the first person they wanted to direct. Do you know who they asked to direct before her?
Ooh, I'm intrigued. No, I have no idea who.
Okay, I'll give you a hint. We have seen a movie with this director on Living in the Past.
I would say my initial gut is Cameron Crowe, since he wrote the book and then the screenplay, but he wasn't directing at this point, so it's not Crowe.
Go the opposite. I'll just say go the opposite of somebody you would think would direct this movie.
Steven Spielberg.
I'm totally clueless.
That's not as outrageous as David Lynch was offered to direct.
What?
Yes.
That would be amazing.
And he turned it down politely, saying they said it. He said it was outside his wheelhouse, which
wow.
I mean, the morgue scene where they're going over the dissected body may have been a little more interesting in a David Lynch directed version.
Yeah.
But that was interesting fact. More of kind of digging into the movie. You mentioned Cameron Crowe wrote it. That's kind of the fact too, that he was embedded in a high school because he was like a young Rolling Stone freelance reporter. So he was writing a nonfiction book about, I guess, just modern high school life. So for Rolling Stone, and then that's why it turned into the movie too. So that's, I guess, more of how the movie feels the way it does. But I thought it would have been weird to see a David Lynch directed Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Wow. That would kick the hell out of the Snyder Cut any day.
Devin, you mentioned a second ago that you wore it out on videotape. Was that how you saw it the first time on video?
Yeah, because in 82 I was 10 and they weren't about to let me in the theater to see this, but you know the previews that were on they meaning my parents. The previews for this just made it look so delightful because it was filled with a bunch of Spicoli one-liners that even at 10 my friends and I would be like mimicking and imitating, knowing nothing more about the film. And then finally getting to see it, I think honestly it was like a TV version that I honestly like taped it from the TV version and just wore that out. And then of course when I saw the actual version, I was like, well, hello, there's some more to this film. It's like the director's cut all of a sudden.
Yeah, I came across on YouTube this beautiful, beautiful thing called YouTube. The CBS edited version of the point scene.
Oh.
And it's literally they go down in the dugout, they sit there, I like your coat, and then it cuts to her talking to Phoebe Cates on the phone.
Wow.
That's it. They're just so they don't even show them kissing.
Wow.
So yeah, that's how I saw it. I saw an edited version on TV, and I'm like, yeah, it's pretty funny. I like this movie. And then I was at a buddy's house. He had HBO and on turns Fast Times. About 15 minutes in, and I was just, what am like? This is not the film that I thought was made.
Yes.
I saw it probably for the first time in '83 or '84, I think. Carl, what about you? When was the first time you saw Fast Times?
Yeah, it was at someone's house on video too. So I didn't even have VCR during that time in my house or anything.
Yeah.
So, and like I said, a lot of times my friends, they didn't even have VCRs; they had the RCA disc. So, but this one may have been videotaped by the time I saw this one. But yeah, somebody else's house, but not the TV cut version. So the first time I saw it, it was the actual theatrical release.
Nice.
Yeah. So Amy Heckerling directed this film, and she did movies like, she's known for like European Vacation, but probably is best known for Clueless, which came out around '94, I believe. So she's pretty like this early in her career, but just a talented filmmaker when it comes to teenage-ish types of movies. I think some of the funniest stuff in European Vacation are with Rusty. Some of the funniest moments are with Rusty. Chevy Chase's son, in the film. I've enjoyed her stuff. I haven't been like, I never fanboyed. I think this is her best film. It's my favorite at least.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
but I tell you what, she might be talented, but who really is talented is the freaking casting director.
Yes.
My
Brilliant.
Lord.
Yes.
This cast is out of control. I mean, you have, of course, Spicoli.
Yeah.
Played by Sean Penn, but you have Jennifer Jason Leigh, Judge Reinhold. You have Phoebe Cates. I mean, you go down the list. Forrest Whitaker's in the film. Eric Stoltz, Nicolas Cage's first appearance, where he's credited as Nicholas Coppola. My goodness, it's just an amazing, amazing kind of who's who of a cast. I think the answer to the question who is the biggest standout in the movie is Sean Penn Spicoli. I'm still going to ask the question, who's from the cast are the standouts? Because there's several, I think.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think we have to say Sean Penn is it's almost an iconic role.
Yeah, it's for sure an
it's
iconic
the
role.
Spicoli
And for those of you
character.
that may not be that familiar with Sean Penn as an actor, he's very much a method actor. So regardless of his role, he will stay in character throughout the entire filming process. Like even if he's not on set or whatever, like so can you imagine what it would be to just like hang out with this character Spicoli day in and day out for 2.5 months? I mean, glorious. I actually went to school with some guys like that I'm not going to mention on air, but yeah. And so I find it super intriguing. It's a great cast. I'm gonna actually go a little against the grain though, Jeremy. While I adore Spicoli, I think he's got obviously the best one-liners throughout the film. But for teenage to middle-aged Devin, the one that stands out is a fabulous Miss Phoebe Cates. Or at least for about 31 seconds of screen time.
I have a question about that later in the
all
show. So stay tuned.
All right.
Stay tuned.
Is your question
Yeah,
why doesn't anybody knock
Gremlins
anymore?
recently. I watched Gremlins recently. You know, Phoebe Cates is in that, and I just made a comment like, "Yeah, I had a big crush on Phoebe Cates." You know, when I was younger, and my wife just kind of looks at me with this kind of look of like, "I know what you're talking about." And I'm like, "Oh crap!" Like, never mind, kids. Don't listen to the conversation.
For me, I would say, you know, and kind of surprised. I thought Robert Ramonis as Mike Damone did a very good job too. Because some of the other stuff, you know, some of the acting wasn't great as far as some of the other characters. And I think reason he doesn't necessarily stand out is because we don't like him. He's the least likable of all the main characters. So, but the way he's talking, the way he's trying to bring Mike, and it's kind of complicated because on the one hand, he's trying to bring Mike along and push him into something. He's trying to bring Mark along and push him into doing something that he wants to do, but at the same time, he's also a sleazebag. So I thought he did a good job with, you know, delivering those lines, like especially when he's given the 5-point plan and he's talking to the cutout of Debbie Harry.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, Debbie, hey, how are you? Great to see you.
Yeah.
So anyway, I thought he did a good job.
Yeah, I agree. He does such a good job that you can't stand him, especially as in the latter part of the film. I would say Phoebe Cates and Sean Penn are kind of the ones that come out of the film probably the most recognizable for different reasons. But Jennifer Jason Leigh, I think, is a great anchor to the film. Like everything seems to kind of surround her. I think her performance is amazing. She was actually older than Phoebe Cates in this movie, so a lot of people don't know that. And her scenes with the older man, Ron, they were actually only 6 months apart. So while I am creeped out, I'm not as creeped out knowing that now. But yeah, it's interesting, just the imprint that this film has on pop culture and just the influence. I think this is sort of the blueprint that most teen comedies adhere to throughout the 80s into the 90s and maybe even into the early 2000s. I think with the way people are today, they're so sensitive about everything. I would say maybe Superbad might be one of the last great teen comedies that sort of fits some of this kind of blueprint.
Yeah.
But I don't see the Superbads and the Fast Times and the Breakfast Clubs. I haven't seen something like that since maybe Superbad, the late maybe 2009, 2010.
Yeah.
So we're definitely, this is sort of a bygone era, I think, but Fast Times, at least to me, feels like one of the first, if not the first. What do you guys think, Devin? Do you agree? I mean, or is there another film we should look to as sort of the blueprint?
Oh no, I mean this is the Rosetta Stone right here, right? I mean this is we find, if we were to go to the most ancient parts of our world and go into caves, we would find literal cave paintings of Spicoli hotboxing painted on the cave walls. So I think that this is a prototype for many things, and I think that you know, one of the things that this does well, and it has to do with Cameron Crowe's article, right? Is it was unflinching. It wasn't this 21 Jump Street version of high school life in America. It wasn't Beverly Hills 90210. It was very, very unflinching. It's like, oh no, kids are actually getting abortions. Kids are actually on dope. And so many of the other situations that came out of Fast Times.
Yeah, absolutely. Carl, what do you think?
I mean, maybe there's some of Animal House. Maybe might be something that kind of does more of a blueprint to a degree, but not so much. You know, the younger teens, the high school teens, and there are differences. It's not exactly the same, but it is one of the foundational ones. I think it's also, being directed by a woman, actually, it has a little bit of a different tone in some of this stuff too. It's maybe the same notes, but they seem a little bit different to a degree.
I want to jump in here because one of the things that Carl, I was almost surprised that this didn't come up as part of your research, or maybe it did and just didn't make it into the show yet. But speaking of Amy Heckerling directing this film, is she really wanted in the pool house scene between Damone and Stacy? She wanted a full frontal of Mike Damone, and that was. It would have been an X-rated film at that point, and so obviously the film company said ain't gonna happen. But it's interesting that would have been leaps and bounds over anything else that was done in cinema at that time.
Yeah, it's an interesting scene, and the reasoning, like her reasoning why, is just for that scene was just how awkward the two are, and how what she was trying to communicate by doing that is they're not ready for this. Like they're not mature enough to be together sexually, and I can see as a director why she was wanting to do that. Most films have no problem showing women, right? But when you want to show a man, no, got to give the X rating. I'm curious. I don't think that footage exists because I think there was more to just seeing them, but like their interactions. But I still think even despite cutting all that, that scene might be one of the most awkward scenes in the whole film, and there's some awkward moments, but that is just this. It's almost like it's honest, and I have a question about that later because the tone, at least to me in the film, shifts when that scene happens. And it stays in this kind of a darker tone as she goes to get the abortion. And I don't know. I don't have a problem with the tonal shift. But I've heard some people say it creates a big problem from this like fun high school movie. But I actually think the people that are saying that weren't really catching on what the movie's trying to say. So we'll get to that in a minute. Let's take a break though, because we're going to work our way through the film. There's so much to talk about. And so we'll take a quick break. We'll come right back and we'll jump into Fast Times at Ridgemont High. All right, the movie starts out with the Go-Go's, and I am in love with the beginning of this film. In fact, YouTube has a clip of the opening of, Fast Times, and it's just the opening credits, and it is everything. It's We Got the Beat. It's malls, arcades, everything at the beginning of this film is one gigantic member berry. But it's so good. And so you're introduced to all the characters. You're introduced to the mall. You're introduced to these interactions, style, arcade games. It's everything. I love the start. Devin, what do you think about the beginning of Fast Times? Does it suck you in? Is it okay to have this gigantic member berry?
I'm going to have to go to Urban Dictionary really quickly and look up what member berry is. But other than that, it is everything that I recall about the 80s because, this was literally like we would go grab a ride on the bus before we were able to drive, and we would go to one of two places. There was Time Zone, which was the arcade in our mall, and then there was Special Effects, which was another arcade that came out in the mid 80s. And so this was it, right? Malls, arcades, and cruising with your friends in packs. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely.
Devin, is the Capitola Mall where you would go? Was that mall around back then?
Yeah, the Capitola Mall was, and still is, the only mall, although back in the day, all of the stores inside the mall actually were full versus being mostly vacant today. And the arcade is long gone as well.
Carl, what do you think about this opening to the film, this member berry?
Yeah, the funny thing is probably when the movie came out or when I first watched it, I didn't really, resonate with the beginning of the movie. And then as an older man, I'm like, the mall, yes, because our local arcade was Aladdin's Castle, so that sounds better than whatever Devin said. But also, one of my first jobs was because of our proximity to Atlanta. Chick-fil-A that's the only place you could get Chick-fil-A was in the malls, and so I actually worked at a Chick-fil-A when I was 16, and it just brought back a lot. So there wasn't really food courts. We were stuck on an end by J.C. Penney and Pearl Vision Center, and not a whole lot of women walking by, trying to. To go out with. I don't understand the whole Brad Hamilton thing. He works at All American Burger, and every time he's walking through school, people are pointing, ooh, ooh, ooh. No one ever pointed at me like, that guy works at Chick-fil-A, man. Woo, check that dude out. So, but anyway, it was fun to see.
Yeah. Yeah, I worked in the mall as well. I worked at the glorious Baskin Robbins, and Carl, I did get some attention for that.
Jeremy was the 30-second flavor.
I did.
No.
Every shift, I got 2 free scoops of ice cream. And I divvied that out to the cute girls that worked in all the food court restaurants around me. So I was well known. I was seen. I worked in the mall. I was just 4 stores away from Barrel of Fun, our arcade, where I got busted skipping school my senior year.
Whoa.
That's a whole other story. But, big bust. Math teacher busted me. So, gotta love it. So we got the opening, and you start dealing with these characters. And so you're introduced to Brad, and you're introduced to Spicoli, and you're introduced to Stacy, and Ron, and you have all these kind of things that kind of these characters that we're going to see throughout the film. And you go into All American Burger, and you have Stacy's older brother, Brad, played by Judge Reinhold. He reprimands Spicoli because they walk in with their shirts on, and as they sit down, they take their shirts off. Then you have this, after the mall closes, Linda, the elder friend to Stacy, encourages her to call Ron, a 26-year-old stereo speaker salesman, to give him a call. She would do it. It's so funny. Linda would call him if she didn't have a fiance in Chicago. We got to talk about this. Linda, there's been this conversation about Phoebe Cates' character, Linda, and there's this kind of contingent of fans of Fast Times at Ridgemont High that don't think Linda has a fiance. I'm curious what you guys think. Do you think she really has a fiance? What's the deal here, Carl? Is she lying? Is she exaggerating? Because she messes up on her when she's describing him throughout the film. She goofs up a few times. So what do you think? Is this guy real or a figment of her imagination? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. It makes her character a lot more interesting if it is made up, and she's just doling out all this advice to everybody, like she's just the most worldly person in the whole school,
right?
And she doesn't. I could see that. I almost think that she maybe had an encounter like the Ron Johnson, and she's kind of an earlier version of Stacy. And he kind of ghosted the way Ron ghosted, but so she's just said, well, we're engaged and he's in Chicago, so that I guess it's a real person and maybe he's really in Chicago, and then she's made up the rest of it.
Yeah, I kind of lean in that direction. Devin, what do you think?
Yeah, I've never even considered her character not having an actual fiance, but if she doesn't and she actually wrote physical letters that she could read in the bathroom at the dance, that's kind of disturbing on a whole new level for me.
It's like, there's a scale of how crazy versus you're fine. So she could outfine her crazy, though, even if she is doing that. So.
Yeah, and to be clear, I've dated crazy, but,
I think we all have, to an extent. So yeah,
I mean, you'd have to go on dates, so I don't. I haven't.
Yeah, I've had the crazy. I've had the big time crazy. So I'll just put it that way. She probably, Carl, I think you're right. I think she probably had some sort of fling and was used and is just kind of spinning the story in her own imagination that this guy is still involved because, she, at the end of the film, she basically says, he won't come to my graduation, and I'm going to break up with him. But I think the breakup had been in existence the whole time. And she's just now kind of coming to grips with that reality. You go from the mall and you go to the first day of school and you have Brad, Mike, the other students are navigating their way through the halls, the bell rings, and then we get the introduction to one of the greatest educators in film history, Mr. Hand, and his U.S. history class. And Spicoli, who is high on marijuana, shows up late to class. Mr. Hand lets him know that that's not cool. He destroys his schedule card. I remember those schedule cards. And then he instructs the boy to leave Spicoli to go to the front office. Devin, as you know, Mr. Hand's near and dear to, our hearts as educators. Here's my question. We both have taught U.S. history. You much more recently than me, but what resonates with you about Mr. Hand and as an educator, as a teacher? And, I would love to hear your thoughts of this glorious man in film.
Yeah, I think as a viewer of Fast Times at Ridgemont High when it came out and I was a student, he was kind of like, oh, Mr. Hand, he's kind of like that mean teacher. And then now 20 or so years into my professional education career, I started day one writing on the board Aloha because of Mr. Hand. So when my teachers come in on day one, it's my little tip of the cap to the great Mr. Hand. I think he's everything that I now see. Like, he's cynical. What are you people on dope? How many times have I, if not said that actually out loud, said it in my head because of some of the just crazy arse things that go on in a classroom? So Mr. Hand is by far one of my most favorite characters in this entire film.
Yeah, he's listen. The amount of times I've wanted to tear up schedules. We live now in the digital age. I had a colleague a few years ago, and Devin, you might remember this story. Carl, I don't think I've told you this, but where Devin and I were working, it's a 1-to-1 iPad school. And you can imagine just the problems that crop up when every kid has an iPad. And the ability for them to play Madden while you're trying to teach. It's amazing. And at one point, a student had fallen asleep. And this teacher friend of mine woke the student up. The student then proceeded to take iPad and start playing a video game. And what the student didn't know is the window behind the student reflected what was on the iPad screen. So this teacher walked over, saw that, and said, stop playing the video game. Student was like, I'm not playing a video game. Teacher, yes, you are. Stop playing it. I'll take your iPad away if you do that again. Goes back to teaching. Student starts playing the video game again. He sees the reflection, knows what's going on, walks over, takes iPad, opens the door, and throws the iPad like a Frisbee.
Glorious.
Out into the lawn outside of our portable classroom. The teacher that did this was much younger, but in that moment, I fell in love with that teacher as one of the best educators I had ever seen.
Yeah.
And I fantasize about doing similar things. Mr. Hand is glorious because I think there's some truth in him that educators have. We're kind of exasperated at the moronic activities of our students, yet at the same time, a lot of us, a large number, will show up at a kid's house to help them to learn.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about Mr. Hand is that he crushes these kids, and yet at the same time, like, there's this reality that I love that Cameron Crowe put in the script where Mr. Hand is willing to go the extra mile. He didn't have to do that. He didn't have to show up, but he does. And I think a lot of educators are that way. We kind of just laugh and shake our heads at our students. And then at the same time, we're willing to show up and say, hey, we're here to help you to learn things. And,
yeah, but Jeremy, I want to jump in here because I think you're also overlooking an important part of this, though, because and you know this because you know that I know that I know that you know this, and that is Mr. Hand was not being just a sympathetic, empathetic teacher that wanted Spicoli to understand the American Revolution. He wanted to make sure he didn't have that kid in his class the next year.
Bravo, Devin. Yes. Hey, we use strategery to figure out how to get kids out of our class. We have to do that sometimes. You go from Mr. Hand's class to Mr. Vargas's biology class, and it's in this class. yes. You go into this class, and then you see Mark Ratner immediately attracted to Stacy. He goes on to tell his buddy Mike he's in love with her. And then you have the instruction moment where there's several, but this is the first one where he instructs Rat to attract girls by adopting an attitude of aloofness. I don't care. You go from, of course, Rat falling in love with Stacy to Stacy then tricking her mother. The only time we see a parent in the film, I believe. And Stacy's mom tucks her into bed. Stacy gets up. You have the Jackson Browne song playing as she goes and hooks up with Ron at the point. They have sex, and she comes home from school after that to find some flowers from Ron. And she basically goes out to Brad, her brother, and she's like, have mom and dad seen these flowers from Ron, this 26-year-old stereo salesman? Brad's like, mom and dad aren't home, which is sort of the theme of the film, one of them. And then she gets rid of the flowers, which Brad actually gives to his girlfriend, which is hilarious. I think it's at this point we need to transition because I have some really big questions that we need to ask. So let's go into 3 big questions because there's some things we need to discuss about Fast Times at this point. So let's transition to 3 big questions.
3 big questions. Three, 2, 1.
All right, there's so much to talk about here. So here's my first question, my 3 big questions. Is this movie really just about older idiot teenagers telling younger idiot teenagers how to do their life, Carl? Is that really what this is all about?
Absolutely. That is a staple of this movie because I mean, and the way they deliver, like Phoebe Cates is delivering these lines, and she's hilarious in the way she's delivering her lines, and just shepherding Stacy, and Stacy seems to have kind of a better idea about what she would want, but she's just following what Linda says to a degree too, So, and kind of, eventually gets her in trouble. But yeah, I think it is, and I think it also, but also me as an adult, I looked at it too, and it's like, yeah, how crazy or ridiculous we are when we were kids and who we were listening to and then what we told other people. But then I also realized, as an adult, I still don't know anything. So we all do it throughout our whole life. If I'm giving you advice, don't listen to it. Okay. It's probably just, I'm winging it. I don't know.
Devin, what do you think?
Yeah. I mean, but that doesn't just go to the characters of the film, right? Like we as teenage viewers are looking at like these upperclassmen for like, oh, show us how to really live life so we're not complete nerds the entire time. And so I think that we can look at these characters and as extreme as some of them are, like pick out pieces that we go like, oh, I think I'm either going to like identify with that part of the character or that character in his or her entirety. And so I think, yeah, that part of this film is exactly in line with what goes down on high school campuses, is looking to upperclassmen as kind of the guide for how to navigate this really funky period in life.
Yeah, and here's my next question. Here's number 2. Ron should be in prison, right? Devin?
Yes.
Devin, what do you think? Ron should be in jail.
Yeah, I think that's clear. Although, but here's the thing, though, and
she's 15.
Yeah,
she's 15,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, but here's the thing, though, Jeremy, and that's this cannot be overstated, and that is like, we lived quite literally in a different time. And so while I don't agree with like the 15-year-old, 14-year-old, 26-year-old relationship on any stretch, like at that time in history, we were much less sensitive about stuff like this than we are today in 2022.
Carl, I doubt you have anything to add. I mean, he goes to prison, right? Ron is gone.
Yeah, I went to law school. Yeah, he goes to prison. Mens rea doesn't matter. It's done. It's statutory, and there's no statute of limitations, so it's done. We could go now. We could go get him now. Still, so.
What? Yeah, Ron's in prison. I mean, I think that's just he ain't going to stop there. He knew.
Yeah.
I don't give a crap about. Are you sure you're 19? No, he knew. It was a child, man. Where the hell are the parents? That's my third big question. Carl, where the hell are they?
They're not even in the photo, the family photo. They're checking
not.
out that Olin Mills pose everybody has, and it's like your parents are behind, or you're standing behind them, and they're in front of you. They're not even in the,
No,
I don't know. I mean, it's what you say. It's kind of, this is a transitioning time to latchkey kids, where this was not a deal, 20 years earlier as much, and it's just kind of, this is what kids end up doing when there's no, adults around to supervise them. They're going to tell each other how things should get done, and it's going to lead to some chaos.
Yeah. As Gen Xers, like most of us, as a generation, we largely grew up without. It was certainly both parents at home, and most often having no parents at home. Right. So I think that like this again. It plays so nicely with that particular spot in history. And think of like the pendulum swung, though, to go from what we experienced growing up as Gen Xers to, by and large, now kids are hovered over and smothered by parents in every little facet of their lives.
Right. So true. I mean, this movie, it definitely reflects the reality. I mean, in '82, I was in third grade, and like I was home. like there were days where mom and dad weren't home. In fact, it was actually around this time they were gone. I went out. I lived on an Air Force base in Hawaii, and on Hickam Air Force Base, and we had an alleyway that went behind our house, big dumpster. And so I would go out there because it was a base. People were moving all the time. And it wasn't uncommon that like parents were just like, I don't want to move all this crap. And they would throw like G.I. Joe toys or Star Wars toys in the dumpster. So I found like awesome stuff. I'm out there. There is a purple box. It's glorious. It's this big purple box. And I'm like, probably some toys in it. Open up the box. It is a officer in the Air Force's entire Playboy collection.
Wow.
I am in third grade. Mom and dad are not home. So it had to have been 50 issues of Playboy. And I took them and I stashed them throughout the neighborhood. I stashed some down at the waterfront at Pearl Harbor behind a rock. I stashed some in the carport.
Wow.
In my room, under my bed, under the mattress. I mean, it's 50 issues.
Wow.
and this is what got me in trouble. I even took some, crawled under my portable classroom at school and hid them there. About 15 issues.
Wow.
I got busted by my father because I was down at the waterfront, and my dad tells this story. Unfortunately, he has told this story to many people, even some girlfriends, which to this day I'm like, that's probably why we broke up. But I was down at the waterfront, and there was this. It was like, imagine a teacher doing storybook time in first grade. Here's little third grade Jeremy on a rock down at the waterfront of Pearl Harbor with a Playboy issue opened up to its centerfold and all these little kids sitting around looking at it. And my dad was jogging. He was just out for a run, and he heard me talking. And he went down and he saw me, and I saw him.
Wow.
And he just pointed to the house.
Oh,
And
my goodness.
I walked home. I knew what I was doing. I walked home sobbing as my dad walked behind me, I knew my death was looming. Thankfully, I
That
didn't
explains. That explains. I took a vacation to Hawaii, and I went to the Arizona Memorial, and behind one of the look around the corner, I was like, there's like 20 Playboys from late 70s, early 80s. So
There you go. I was stashing them everywhere, man.
Oh my god! I mean, I think that's the thing that makes this truly
the life
epic,
of
Jeremy.
latchkey kids.
Yeah, I mean the fact that I think we could all identify with strands of that story, Jeremy. But the fact that it was on like an international historical site is just chef's kiss. Mwah.
Oh gosh. You have a moment in the movie, though, that resonates with me even more, and not just the where the hell are the parents, but when Brad gets fired. So the scene where he's at All American Burger, he's like a assistant manager or whatever. He's rehearsing his breakup speech to Lisa when a customer comes in. He goes out to wait at the counter, and this customer is just as big of an asshole as you can get. Demanding his money back. Brad, in a great scene, he threatens the customer. He's basically like, if you don't shut up, I'm going to kick 100% of your ass. Brad gets in trouble. The manager fires him on the spot. Listen, I've worked so many jobs. Walmart is probably chief among them. I worked for 3 years at Walmart, where I truly wanted to kick the ass of a customer. My question to you is, one, the scene's glorious, right? And then second is, have you ever had those experiences at work where you're wanting to, like, destroy your customer?
Yeah.
Devin, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I've had my share of retail jobs throughout my life, and there have definitely been times like that where I could just feel my fists start to clench and stuff. And if not for probably the very strong inner calling to not go to prison, I probably would have done something that would not have been that great. And I'm gonna say though, like, is this? Let me kind of toss this back to you though. Do we see this as if Fast Times at Ridgemont High is a prototype for high school films to come? Is this the prototype? Is this the Rosetta Stone of Karen?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's I taught, like, because I'm teaching teenagers now in high school. I have a class of some seniors and juniors, and a lot of them work. And some have been telling me some of the stories. Many of them work at a Chick-fil-A that's in town here. And the stuff they say, just like their experiences, a lot of them will work during the summer, and then they'll just focus on school during the year and then work in the summer. And they when they were coming back from the summer break, they were telling me stories about how they were treated over the summer. And I couldn't believe some of the stuff. And so I think it's almost like customers writ large. I mean, this is just how people are now.
Yeah.
It's just this. And I think that's why so many people are quitting their jobs. They're like, I am not making $12 an hour to be verbally abused on a daily basis. Screw this. I'll go do something else.
Yes.
And that's why, like, a lot of, at least here in northern Alabama, it's rare to have a dining room open of like a fast food place. They just don't have the workers. They can man the drive-through, but that's about it. I don't know, Carl. What do you think?
Yeah, I've worked a lot of retail as well. It's I want to educate the public on what the words "up to" means. I worked at a drugstore, and so the doctors don't know how things get paid for, how much stuff costs when it comes to medicine, and reps are just handing out stuff, and they get these cards, and it's like the doctor goes, "Yeah, you take this to the pharmacy, and it's going to be, they'll save you up to 90%." Okay, up to means that's the top of the the range. Bottom of the range could be 0, and so I had a lady get just. And putting that information in the computer is a pain. So I do all this and tell the lady what the price is going to be. And she, I understand. When you get between people and their medicine, they get upset. Right. So it was just like, she's like, well, no, that's not right. Do it again. I'm like, well, I can hit send again and it's going to come back the same way. Yeah. I don't know. Well, he said it would save it. I said, well, it's up to, that doesn't mean it's going to be. So she got really angry with me and somebody had to pull me aside and let, take over at that point. But the worst, I was kind of in management at Walmart, and I had to go to the service desk because somebody was up there like, I need the managers, I need all the managers, and so I was happy to be walking by. It's like, well, what do you need? I need to use your fax machine. I said, sorry, sir, we don't have a fax. You don't have a fax machine here? Well, I do. It's in the back, but we don't have it for customers' use. What? I gotta. And you're not gonna let me use your fax machine? No, sir, it's not for customers' use. And he's like, I can't believe that. He started to walk out. He comes back. Goes, look at that cheap suit. Look at that cheap tie you're wearing. That cheap shirt. You're just. I'm gonna make more money than you. I can't believe you're not gonna let me smell this car. He put the key of his car in my face. Smell this. Smell this key. You'll never. It's a BMW. Wow. You'll never sniff that. You'll never have something as nice as that. And he went on, and even came back. It's like, hey, and don't ever go up to Harlem because you white boys got those little bitty wee wees and you won't last 10 minutes in Harlem and stuff. So I was like, but that one was so funny. He did. I waved the white flag on that one, but that one was actually it was so ridiculous, and the ladies at the service desk were looking at him too, and they're like, "How did you stand that?" I'm like, "It's just that point. At some point, that it's so ridiculous, it doesn't matter." I was kind of laughing about it, and they were laughing about it too. So, but I think it's a lot of people feel powerless in their everyday life. They've got bosses. They've got things they have to do. And that's the only place where they know they can, a customer is always right. And so I can abuse that to a degree. And honestly, most people don't. I've had, most people were understanding a lot of things I said. But there's a few people that have had a bad day or whatever. And they know you can't do anything to defend yourself. And I think that's where a lot of it comes from.
Right. Yeah, it truly is. And that's the thing about Fast Times is that, yeah, it's this comedy, but throughout there are these moments that ring true, where we're like, we identify with it, we get it. It's this odd honesty, and I think this is one of the reasons why it stands up today as just a really, really good film. Yeah, it's funny, but there's these experiences that we all can latch onto and go, yeah, I know how that feels. I've had a similar experience, and I think this is all born out of Cameron Crowe's, firsthand account. Really, he really tried to truthfully relay his experiences, and it really shows in this film. And I love it for it. And we go from Brad getting fired to I never asked myself this question in all the years I've seen Fast Times. But last night, I was watching the movie, and I'm like, wait a minute. Is Spicoli more intelligent than I've been giving him credit for? So if you all remember the movie, you have you basically have Spicoli and Charles Jefferson's little brother. Charles Jefferson's a great football player. I think he's a linebacker. I'm not sure. But Jefferson's younger brother, they're driving Charles Jefferson's car around. They wreck it. But Spicoli parks the car in front of the school, and then he spray paints Die Ridgemont Lincoln Kills because they're about to play Lincoln. And so Spicoli gets away from dying at the hands of Jefferson by pretending another school has taken his car and just completely defaced it. Guys, Devin, is Spicoli way smarter than we're giving him credit for?
Yeah, and shame on us, right? I mean, obviously he's not going to be the one that's probably taking the AP exams and stuff, but yeah, he's got a certain level of street smarts about him, right? And I think that's the thing that we love is even his back and forth with Mr. Hand, right? With like, learn about Cuba, having some food. Like we can look at those as being like a really smart ass teenager, but in fact, like, no, he's taking Mr. Hand's words exactly how Mr. Hand has said them. So yes, absolutely. His ability to think right on the spot after the crash, like, relax, my dad's a TV repairman. He's got an ultimate set of tools. And I think that I think that, like, yes, he's brilliant in his own Jeff Spicoli way.
I think he might be a little more present than we give him credit for.
Well, but think about this too.
Carl,
And I want to jump back in before he tosses it back to
Yeah.
Carl. But Spicoli's the only character in this film that is himself from start to finish. He's not trying to be anyone else.
There's this weird truth to Spicoli. Spicoli sort of like has stood the test of time just recently. I think it was over the summer. I can't remember. But it's been during COVID. I think it was for maybe a charity or something, but Julia Roberts, Brad Pitt, Sean Penn, and other Morgan Freeman, they did a reading of Fast Times.
Mm-hmm.
And Shia LaBeouf played Spicoli. And I thought I've found nothing more funny than Brad Pitt and Sean Penn. I think Brad Pitt plays Brad. They are dying laughing at a truly stoned Shia LaBeouf playing Spicoli. I mean, he's literally smoking a joint on his Zoom call playing Spicoli, and it's dynamic and hilarious. And if you want a good laugh, listeners, go find those videos. There's even just highlights of Shia just playing Spicoli. It's glorious, but it's really funny to watch Sean Penn die laughing at this portrayal of Spicoli. He stands the test of time, I think. I don't know, Carl. Is he smarter than we are giving him credit for?
Yeah, I think that's another part of the lesson there too, is that there are reasons to go to school. There are reasons to get advanced degrees. I mean, it improves many people's lives, and there's many advances in the world because of it. But all Spicoli wants is, like, if I have some gnarly waves, I'm good. That's all I need. So he knows what he wants. So there's no need to. He's not dumb. There's no need to put all this other stuff in my mind necessarily, because I know what I want, and it's just something simple. I want a simple life as far as just riding some waves.
Yeah. All right, so we go from this sequence, we go to the game. Of course, they win the game, the football game. But we go back to Brad, and he's working at a new job at a seafood restaurant wearing a completely ridiculous outfit. You have that juxtaposed, and this is the scene from Fast Times for almost every single heterosexual male of the early 80s. And you have Stacy and Lisa, they're lounging by the pool, and then Rat and Mike show up, and then you have Brad getting home, and this is the masturbation scene where he's imagining Linda coming out of the water in the red bikini. Is this the most paused videotape moment of the 1980s, Devin?
I'm sorry. Was there what would even be a close second to that, Jeremy? I mean, yes.
I have no idea.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what else would even come close to that.
I remember, and I'm not exaggerating, I was probably 8th grade, and we rented it.
Yeah.
And we, being me and my buddies, we had to spend the night party. We rented it. We fast forwarded to that scene, and the videotape was so worn out in that scene we couldn't pause it.
Yeah,
it wouldn't pause on anything. It was a mess, and we were so mad. And looking back on it, it's probably because that damn videotape had been paused so many times on that scene. I think it might be the most paused videotape moment of the 1980s. Carl, is there any other contenders?
I can't think of any. No, I mean, it's
Yeah.
I think people still reference it. I mean, I think was it Euro Trip or somewhere where someone was they had Amy Smart, and they said the director was like, hey, the Phoebe Cates scene and Fast Time at Ridgemont High was just very meaningful to me, and you could be that for other young men or whatever. So, it's I don't know. It's probably in the the National Institute of Films Hall of Fame somewhere.
Well, and you used to hear like Carrie
Congress
Fisher talk about so many of Star Wars fans just like completely going googly eyes over her Princess Leia bikini in Return of the Jedi. And I'm just here to say, let me just set the record straight. That's great and all. Doesn't come close to the fabulous Miss Phoebe Cates.
It's interesting. Carrie Fisher actually auditioned for the movie. I don't think it was for the role of Stacy or Linda. I'm not sure what she was, what part she was trying to get, but I know she auditioned, which would have been really interesting. The movie gets heavy at this point, because this is when Mike gets involved with Stacy. They have sex. It's super awkward. He finishes in 5 seconds, runs off because he's ashamed, but gets her pregnant. You have the whole abortion storyline, and it's I don't know. It's interesting how I feel like the film has always sort of had this tone underneath the surface, because if you go back to the scene with Stacy and Ron, it's not glorified at all. As Stacy's losing her virginity, she's staring at all the spray paint words in the dugout. It's just depressing. And then you go to this scene where she's having to deal with an abortion, and of course Mike isn't helping and totally doesn't show up. But Brad's, her brother's able to take her. I've had people tell me that they're in the movie until this point and they just turn it off because they just don't think the movie's any good after this point. It's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, but people believe that. But you do have to admit that there is some sort of shifting in tone, or at least a tone that's underneath the surface becomes more prominent at this point. Does this mess up the film? Does this take you out of the film? Carl, what do you think as we get to this moment, as we move into the last third of the movie?
I don't think it messes up the film.
Yeah.
We talked earlier about whether or not this was maybe the template for comedies, teenage comedies, and I think this is what a lot of the teenage comedies do miss. They're funny and they're fun time, but then they really aren't saying anything. They all seem to, they all come around to this is my life and not my parents' life, maybe is about the closest thing they'd come to. But, the whole thing is, Stacy at the end says she wants romance, and Linda's like, this is, we can't even get cable in Ridgemont, much less romance. And so I think it's kind of one of those things that it's like movies for the most part are, they show everything as glamorous and romantic. And so people maybe rush into situations like you've maybe said earlier that they're not ready for. And then they regret, instead of, being, and so it's kind of like you talked about the honesty. Look, this is not romantic. It's not glamorous. It's uncomfortable. It's painful. It's, and so just, I guess, at least sort of letting people in the audience know, teenagers, like all the stuff you see about how great everything, wonderful everything is, not necessarily the case. So,
yeah, there is that honesty. Devin, does this tonal kind of shift, or if you even call it that, or does this element of the film, does this elevate it to being the reason why it's a classic?
Yeah, listen, I totally understand and can't even really push back it's a huge shift and it's kind of a wince moment. I don't want to go there, but the reality is that is the reality. People, high schoolers are going through stuff like that, and even more so in today's world. So I get the cringe factor or don't be a buzzkill factor, but at the same time, the reality is that's pretty accurate.
Yeah, it is. And yet, in the midst of all this, there's this authenticity, but then the film starts moving toward the end of the school year. And you have Mr. Hand going to Spicoli's. You have the big dance where all this stuff comes out. You realize, Linda's going to break up with her fiance, if this is a real person or not. You have, all these realizations happening. You have you know, Rat and Mike kind of making up because they get in a fight. You have all this happening, and then you move into the very end where people are out at, like, Brad's working at a convenience store now. You have the last scene of the film where he throws coffee in the face of an armed robber. Of course, Spicoli's there to witness it. And then you roll to the epilogue where it tells you what happens to everybody. For the end of the movie, is there anything like that you appreciate, enjoy? Everything from the dance to Mr. Hand helping Spicoli to Brad throwing the coffee in the guy's face. Is there anything that, like, yes, this is what makes the ending so much fun?
No, I mean, I think that the ending and the little epilogue that we see on screen is everything there, like, lines up with the character that we've seen for the previous 90 minutes or whatever the runtime is.
Yes.
And I think that
Yeah.
that's what's great. I mean, of course Spicoli's going to blow it on hiring Van Halen, and you know, of course Mr. Hand is going to be everly more convinced that everyone is on dope, and yes, I think the epilogue is fantastic.
Yeah, I would. I'd say that actually the epilogue was not something that Amy Heckerling wanted to do. She was forced by the studio to do that. So but still, I do think the Van Halen one is funny. I mean, it kind of the capper that makes it worth it. But I do feel good about Brad being able to channel this year of just unbelievably bad luck and anger and rage, and then take it out on a would-be robber, get a promotion, and kind of get life back on track to the way it needed to go. Especially since, you know, we talked about how the second part of the movie, or the last third of the movie, is a downer. You know, the thing about standout performances, I wasn't really impressed necessarily with Judge Reinhold's acting through most of it, but he did have this part where, you know, it's like this is his little sister that he argues with about cleaning the pool and all the stuff at home, but then he also, because of a lack of parents being around, has to be the person to sort of to be the father figure to her, or a parental figure to her, to walk her through this, you know, this valley she's going through, where she doesn't really have anybody to talk to or console her about that. So I think he does a good job there, and then I'm glad that his character, because of that, gets kind of an upswing at the end of the movie.
Yeah, it's good stuff. I mean, as you get to the end, I have a question, like, would you change anything that what happens to them in the epilogue? Like, would you change any character? And everyone, Devin, I think you're right. Everything is spot on. I mean, everything from, you know, Linda living with her abnormal psych professor in college to, you know, Rat and Stacy being together. Yes, Mr. Hand, like, everybody, it's just, even though, Carl, you mentioned it was sort of tacked on at the end, it's just, it works. It's really good, and it's kind of one last laugh as we roll to credits. And, yeah, I think that's what makes Fast Times special. Another thing that makes it special is the soundtrack. And so we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we're going to do Lock It In and Rip the Knob Off, where we pick what song we're going to listen to when we leave the theater.
Just let me hear some of that rock and roll music. Are you reeling in the east? They say the harder rock and roll is to me than me. Yeah.
All time rock and roll 95.5.
Lock it in and rip the knob off.
All right, typically what we do on Lock It In and Rip the Knob Off is we discuss what songs were in the top 100 the day the movie came out. This movie came out on August 13th, 1982. We're in the 40th anniversary year, but the soundtrack is amazing from Fast Times at Ridgemont High. So instead of looking at the bigger top 100, we're going to look at the soundtrack and the music that's in the movie. It's everything from Somebody's Baby by Jackson Browne. You even have, like, Fast Times, a song written by Fast Times at Ridgemont High by Sammy Hagar. You have Jimmy Buffett on the soundtrack, Stevie Nicks on the soundtrack, Donna Summer. I mean, Don Henley's on it. Joe Walsh is on it. But then you have songs that were not even on the soundtrack. You have the Go-Go's, We Got the Beat, American Girl by Tom Petty, Kashmir by Zeppelin. The Cars are on it. I mean, it's just, the music in this movie is amazing. So our question for today for Lock It In and Rip the Knob Off is, what from the soundtrack or in the movie, what are you listening to on the way home from the theater? And Carl, we're gonna start with you. What do you listen to as you leave?
I really like the Go-Go's We Got the Beat. I mean, it's just a fun, upbeat song. I'm not going to make any puns about the scene with Brad in the swimming pool, but, we got the beat. I think that's a fun one to listen to.
Yeah, that's a good one. It's a good one. Devin, what about you? What are you going with?
Yeah, I think that it's fascinating to me because the soundtrack is like, it can hold its own, but the songs from the film that aren't on the actual soundtrack are phenomenal. In fact, let me just go down the list. And so We Got the Beat, American Girl, Tom Petty, Winter Wonderland, Darling Love, Kashmir, Moving in Stereo, Life in the Fast Lane, and Willie. I cannot hear those songs and not in my mind automatically think about Fast Times at Ridgemont High. And that I think it says a lot about the film in and of itself. And so I've got to go with these songs that didn't make the actual soundtrack. I think I've got to go with We Got the Beat. And Jeremy touched on this earlier in the show. Just you've got that opening scene with the mall and arcades and food courts, and I think that is the quintessential tie-in for me and Fast Times.
Yeah, I would say for me, it's like We Got the Beat's wonderful, and I would lean there initially. And as I thought more about the movie and the songs in it and the moments that those songs play, I think Somebody's Baby by Jackson Brown's probably the most powerful, just of how it's following Stacy in these really awkward moments in her life sexually. And so I find that song to have a unique power. But ultimately I would go with Tom Petty's American Girl. It was played, I think, on the first day of school. I think that's a great song, just in general, but in this movie, I love where it's at in the movie. And that's what I would go with as I leave the parking lot. I'm a huge Tom Petty fan in general. Aside from Zeppelin, who is one of my all-time favorites, Tom Petty is in my top 10 easily. So, anyways, that's what I would go with. Listeners, let us know, what would you pick from the soundtrack to listen to? Patrons, let us know on Patreon, and then our listeners on Twitter. We got to do There Can Be Only One. It's what's the best thing about the movie? There's so much. I think what's interesting about Fast Times is there's so many moments where you can turn on this movie and you don't have to watch it from the beginning to the end. You can just kind of pick it up wherever you want, and you can just watch it from that point. You can watch scenes. It's a very unique movie in that way. It doesn't have the narrative structure that you see in a lot of films like Breakfast Club. You can't really do that with Breakfast Club like you can with Fast Times. So there's so many wonderful moments. There Can Be Only One coming up right now.
There can be only one.
All right. So what's the single best thing, gentlemen? Character, moment, scene, line, theme, song, etc. about Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I'm going to go with Spicoli ordering the pizza, his whole dialogue with Mr. Hand where he says, "Isn't this our time?" And Mr. Hand's response, "It is our time. Let's feed the whole class your pizza." I just freaking adore that moment. I adore all of Mr. Hand's and Spicoli's interactions. It's just classic stuff. Carl, what about you? What's the single best thing about Fast Times?
Well, in watching it last night, I noticed a poster behind, I think, Mark when they're at the record store. Licorice Pizza. I never even knew what that was, and there's a movie coming out now, and I'm like, what am I missing with Licorice Pizza? And it was a record store back in Southern California back in the day. I had no idea. So anyway, that was kind of
awesome.
Neat. But also the football scene where Charles Jefferson just wreaks havoc on the rest of the team. It's kind of like a mini inserted The Water Boy. You just put The Water Boy in the middle of the movie there for a little bit.
Yes.
I think Adam Sandler probably watched Fast Times and was like, let's make that section a whole movie. So that was that was a pretty awesome part.
Yeah, that's glorious. Devin, what about you? What's your can be only one moment?
There's so much about this film to absolutely love and adore, and I think that you know, we barely even scraped the surface on so much of it. I mean, who could forget like Mark and Stacy's first date, and he forgets his wallet and how awkward that is, and so many little nuance things. Do you remember that girl looks just like Linda Ronstadt? And listen, let me just say the word carrots, and listeners, you probably know what that's regarding. But I've got to go if I'm going to pick something.
Yeah, there's a Patreon episode, Devin, way back where we talk about the carrots.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
If you want to go there, you can, listeners.
With Jeff Spicoli's dialogue throughout the film, his one-liners are like they're just so memorable. Like you can. Spicoli's one-liners are things that you can drop into everyday's conversation, and many people may not get it, but for those that have seen Fast Times at Ridgemont High, they absolutely know what you're talking about. So I've just got to go with Uno Nicolette. I've got to go with Spicoli, like you said, ordering the pizza. I've got to go with him at the end of the film. All right, Hamilton. And of course, like I started the show off when he's banging the shoe on his head and said, talking to Eric Stoltz's character, that's my skull. So yeah, it's great. They fall out hotboxing in the school parking lot. It's epic.
Yeah, it's and it's not far from the true reality of some of the students I've taught in my life.
Yes.
And I see Spicoli in many more than I thought I would see. Let me just put it that way. Oh my gosh, Fast Times at Ridgemont High is a classic. You can find us on Twitter at Live in the Past, LIVIN, The Past. You can find us if you want to hear more content. We're on patreon.com at Living in the Past, LIVININ The Past. Facebook, we're there too, Live in the Past. Our next episode for the main show, we're going to be jumping back to 1992. We're going to be looking at A Few Good Men, but we're also going to be talking about the best courtroom dramas of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. It's the 30th anniversary of A Few Good Men. It's hard to believe. Our What You Talking About episode on Patreon, we're going to be talking about cop shows of the 80s and 90s, like your Hill Street Blues, your NYPD Blue, those types of shows. I'm sure Magnum PI will be in there as well. I guess that could be a cop show, but then Miami Vice will also be part of the discussion. You can't go wrong with the Vice. So that's coming up. Thank you all so much for listening, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.